All right, welcome to the Produce Safety Alliance Educator Call for February 22nd. My name is Connie Fisk. I'm the PSA Northwest Regional Extension Associate. And today I'm going to share with you a new PowerPoint from the Remote Train the Trainer course on remote training delivery tips. So these are some ideas that we put together after offering the Remote Train the Trainer course several times and also participating in several remote grower trainings. Just a few really important tips and tricks, ways to make your remote courses as good as they can possibly be. So that's what I'm going to run through in about the next 45 minutes. As a reminder, just some basic housekeeping. Everyone is muted. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the meeting, so hold your questions or feel free to type them in the chat and we'll go through them at the end. Also, to let you know, this session is being recorded and we're going to share the recording and the slides on our educator group webpage after the call. So you'll have access to this information. You can come back to it. As I mentioned, this presentation is new to our Remote Train the Trainer courses. Participants have received it as a printed PowerPoint handout so they can include that with their manual. And again, it covers 10 basic tips. So I distilled down some of our learnings over the past few months into 10 major takeaways. And I really want to draw your attention to some of that behind the scenes work that has gone into making remote courses successful over the past year, including the remote PSA Train the Trainer course. To start, I want you to think back to when you were in school. Remember how some classes were just so invigorating that you looked forward to them? And you scored well in those subjects, right? So what was different about those classes, or what was different about those instructors? Among other factors, engagement is sure to be at the top of that list. It's a fact that those instructors who engage course participants better improve learning outcomes. And so if you engage your course participants, they're going to be able to recall and retain that information longer, which means they'll be better prepared to assess risks and implement food safety practices when they return to the farm. And that's our goal. To get the best results from your remote trainings, you need to keep your course participants engaged from start to finish. And engagement is important in face-to-face courses too, but I would argue that it's even more crucial in remote courses because your audience is more likely to get distracted by what's going on around them. Distracted attendees can be the death of a module, no matter the topic. And if the participants are left idle for a long stretch of time, their mind is bound to wander. So what is engagement? Here are two definitions I found online that I really agree with. The first is the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, and passion that course participants show when they're learning and being taught. And the next is the extent to which course participants are interested or actively involved in your content. So when I talk about engagement, that's what I'm talking about. And for most of us, it takes some planning to achieve engagement. It's more than just reading off the slides. It usually involves engagement elements. Something that makes our course participants take action, like chat, annotate, nonverbal feedback, requiring them to draw or make a list of things. And trainers use these elements to enhance learning and encourage participants to contribute to a training conversation. So it's really a two-way flow of information rather than just me spewing information at you. The three Zoom tools that we most often use to increase engagement are annotate, nonverbal feedback, and reactions. And you don't see them in our current webinar because this is a webinar. So the tools that you'll see on your screen in Zoom will look different when you're in a meeting, which is how we offer most of our remote courses. So that's why you're not seeing these options now. These options are disabled by default when you first start using Zoom. So if you want to use annotate, nonverbal feedback, or meeting reactions in your courses, you need to log into your Zoom account online. And for us, it's cornell.zoom.us. So if you're with another academic institution, it's probably a similar URL. And then what you're going to do is you're going to toggle to click to enable those tools. And this needs to be done before you start the meeting if you want to use those tools in your meeting. It doesn't have to be done before you schedule the meeting, but before you start your meeting. And if you have any questions about using the Zoom features I'm going to talk about today, they have a great support page at support.zoom.us. And there's a search box at the top so you can type in annotate, and it'll give you all the resources for annotate. It'll walk through the details, and it usually also has a video that if you're more of a visual learner than a read-write learner, that they have that video option there at the top of those pages. So I strongly encourage you to bookmark support.zoom.us because there's a wealth of information there about how to use all these different Zoom tools. So here's an example of how you can use annotate in your remote PSA grower trainings with the clicker questions. So open annotate, and I'm wanting you to play along now. Open annotate, it's either at the top or bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, it might be under more or view options. So I want you to go to annotate, choose a stamp, and then place it next to the answer you think is correct. And again, that annotate option is probably at the top or bottom of your screen. It may be under more or view options. Thanks, Rob. I was beginning to wonder if nobody could see it but me. And now by the reactions, I'm wondering if it's only the panelists that can see it.
Hey, Connie, somebody mentioned in the chat box that they do not have permission to annotate. So that could be a factor because this is a webinar and not a normal Zoom meeting.
Very good point. Yep, this is a webinar. Again, we're kind of learning the webinar tools are different than the meeting tools, and that's one that evidently is wrong. So again, you get the idea though by seeing what was answered by my team, that you can pick a stamp. It's a star, it's a heart, it's a question mark. So this is a really handy tool to get that grower participation throughout the modules. All our clicker questions can easily be converted to have boxes or some other way to let the growers in your training participate via annotate. And it's really easy to use in meetings. If you have trouble, feel free to send me an email and I'll help walk you through it. I apologize that it doesn't work the same way in webinar. All right, so that's annotate. And as you can see, somebody else on my team cleared those votes for me. So that's something to think about if you plan to use annotate, to have someone, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but to have someone on your training team assigned to back up each module. So for this module, for example, it could be Tommy backing me up. And so that when I'm done and ready to move to the next slide, he just clears all those votes before I move on. All right. The other two that I mentioned were nonverbal feedback and reactions. And with the most recent Zoom update, these are all now in the same location. And again, these don't show up in webinar, so I took some screenshots to let you know what those look like. But they will be down at the bottom of your screen next to breakout rooms. It's the same reaction button that you've seen before, but now when you click on it, in addition to the reactions, that top row, all the old stuff that we thought was nonverbal feedback previously in the participant panel is now also down there under reactions. So the reaction links, all those ones at the top now, including the yes, no, slower, and faster, those will appear both on top of your video thumbnail and in the participant window for 10 seconds, and then they magically disappear. And most often in trainings, we're asking for a thumbs up or we ask a yes, no question. But again, there's lots of different ways you could use reactions. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that they're now all under that one button. So those will all disappear in 10 seconds magically. The only one that stays both on top of your video thumbnail and in that participant window is the raise hands button. So it's going to show up in the participant panel and on your video thumbnail until it gets either dismissed by the participant or one of the co-hosts clears it. So to clear it, if you are that backup person for the module, you can either clear them individually or click those 3 little dots at the bottom of the participant window, and you'll see an option to lower all hands at the bottom. So for example, if you did a poll and you said, raise your hand if you've ever done this, and 20 people raised their hand, you could lower all those hands at once. So that's reactions and nonverbal feedback. And I see that Rob Way raised his hand. Thanks, Rob. Okay, so there are a few other engagement ideas using Zoom tools. And the first is polling. If you want to ask anonymous, multiple choice, true, false, or multiple answer questions in Zoom, you can use polling. And that's another optional feature that you have to turn on before the meeting. And the Zoom support website gives great instructions. You can also go back and watch our May 18th, 2020 PSA educator call for an explanation of how to use polls for the post test used by most of our regional centers. And I'll share that link as a reminder at the end of this presentation. So we did have an educator call back in May, and a big portion of that was how to use polls in Zoom. The next is the chat box. So we asked Train the Trainer participants and grower participants to type in the chat box a few times throughout the course. And I wanted to demonstrate a specific way that I like to use this tool. So make sure your chat box window is open. Oh, we don't have chat, sorry. Again, I was all excited to show you this thing. We don't have chat because it's a webinar. One of the ways I'll just walk you through it. One of the ways I like to use chat is to, again, warn everybody up front that we're going to have an activity. Make sure your chat window is open. There's always 1 or 2 participants that have trouble finding it. So that's one of the things, if you plan to use this activity, I would recommend going through it in that 15 minutes or so at the beginning of the day before you actually start your class. Make sure everybody knows where the different tools are. Make sure they know where annotate is, make sure they know where chat is. So when it comes time for the activity, you're not having to help people one-on-one. You've already taken care of that. So one of the ways, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, they actually do have access to chat. Thanks, Craig, for commenting.
Oh,
so yeah, so you can actually demonstrate if you want to.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Again, I don't see everything that you see because I'm in presenter mode. And so some of my stuff has disappeared because I only have a single screen. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do this. So everybody find the chat box. Go ahead and open that up. I'm going to give you instructions, but don't hit enter. Okay. So what I want you to do is to type in the chat box which module is your favorite one to teach and why, but don't hit enter until I say 3, 2, 1, go. I want to make sure I give everyone time to come up with an answer and get it typed out before we hit enter. So you're not influenced by anyone else's answer. I'm sure you've experienced that in classes before. There's always 2 or 3 attendees who come up with answers really quick, and then you don't hear from anybody else. And I know I personally don't think well quickly, and I'll end up reading everybody else's answers rather than formulating my own. So using this trick, everybody gets a chance to focus on their own answer, and everyone knows that they are expected to participate. That I'm not just looking for 2 or 3 answers. I'm looking for everybody who's on the call right now, all 39 of you, to type an answer in the chat box. Okay, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to type their favorite module to teach and why. And now I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, go. And then everybody hit enter. Fantastic. So this is called a waterfall chat or a chat attack. And again, the idea behind it is it encourages everybody to participate rather than just the 2 or 3 that are always answering questions, right? There's some really good answers in the chat box. Thank you all for participating. So that's one I like to use. Again, I find it helpful as a participant because I don't think that quick. It gives me time. And it also helps me understand that, yes, the instructor really wants to hear from everybody in the class. Very good. All right, the next one is breakout rooms. Zoom has a breakout room feature that you can turn on in settings when you're logged in online. And again, if you want to use this feature, I recommend visiting Zoom's support webpage for details. This one is one that you'll want to practice with your training team ahead of time, just to make sure you understand how it works. But if there's an activity you would like your participants to discuss in small groups, like our zone activity in Module 6, for example, you can send them into breakout rooms with a facilitator or someone in their group that has been assigned the task of moderating. They can record their discussion either on paper or in a Google Doc, and then later, when they come back to the full room, report out what they discussed. Same as we would do it in a face-to-face class, but using Zoom's breakout rooms. And again, remote train the trainer participants get to experience this several times throughout the course as we've tweaked things during this remote period. So again, if you have any questions about that, check out support.zoom.us. And if you still have questions, feel free to email me at connie.fisk@cornell.edu. So those are some Zoom engagement ideas. And of course, there are lots of other general engagement ideas, and I'm sure that you've used many of these over the years. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to share those here in a minute as well. The first one is visuals. As you know, visuals are really important. They help you tell a story. You can ask your growers to think about a scenario, for example, paint a picture in your mind. You could have them annotate on top of an illustration. For example, the illustration at the beginning of Module 4, where we want you to think about the risks on the farm associated with animals and land use. You could use annotate to draw on that picture, for example. The next is to show a demo live or use a YouTube video. Maybe you want to record a demo ahead of time so that you know it's right and there are no mistakes and it's a certain amount of time you can count on. Those are great to illustrate some of our produce safety points. You can use humor, storytelling, and games, right? And these are things that we've been talking about for years, but it's kind of exciting to find ways to use them in a remote training. And if you want to ask open-ended questions and you want the answers to be anonymous, I encourage you to check out Mentimeter or Slido. So what we did with the waterfall chat earlier is fantastic, but you'll notice that everybody's name showed up. So I know who answered what. Oftentimes growers don't want to share things out loud that other people can, link to them. So you might have questions you want to ask that you want to remain anonymous. And these two online tools allow you to do that. They each have a number of different question types to choose from, in addition to open-ended questions. They just look a little different. One bonus about using Slido is that it produces a QR code that you can display on your screen. And then your participants can just scan that with their phone camera, their cell phone camera, and it'll take them right to the web page. So they don't have to worry about typing in a URL, clicking on a link. But in my opinion, I like Mentimeter, because it's more visually appealing, but I use them both depending on the training and what I'm trying to accomplish. So I want to demonstrate Mentimeter to you right now. So please open a browser window or grab your cell phone and go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and then enter this 7-digit code. All right, so now what I'm showing you is my Mentimeter screen. And again, it's got that URL at the top and the code. And I want to ask you, which engagement ideas have you found successful in your remote PSA grower trainings? Because again, I know a lot of you have been very busy teaching remote courses, and I'm sure you have ideas about what's worked for you and what hasn't. So I'm going to give everybody a few more seconds to find this URL and enter the code, and then I'll start the countdown. So which engagement ideas have you found successful in remote PSA grower trainings? How have you engaged your growers? Okay, Menti, poll questions, breakout rooms, showing pictures and asking, right, having a discussion about those pictures, fantastic. All the Zoom tools. Yes, long, awkward silences. That's fantastic. Embrace the awkward silence. Eventually, someone will chime in. calling on growers by name, that's one of my favorites as well. So it's important to have the names right there in that participant window or printed out on a sheet in front of you. All right, so we've got 1 minute to go. Go ahead and keep typing in your answers. And one of the things I like about using this, again, because it's anonymous, you can have people answer multiple times. And at the end of the activity, it sends me a PDF. So as the instructor, I get a PDF of everybody's answers, which is great for later and thinking about how to improve trainings. But also I can share that list with everybody who was on the call. So for example, we will post the PDF of this list on our educator call page. So everybody who was here today and also everybody who's watching at a later date will have access to these answers, because often, I mean, we can really learn a lot from each other. And the same thing with growers, you know, they can learn a lot from each other and what has worked on the farm. So I like that this captures all those answers and makes it really easy to share them. All right, voting is now closed. Thank you very much for participating. The last thing I wanted to do is just show you again, and it's the same with Slido, that if you create an account and they're free, it's a free account with both mentimeter.com or slido.com, but they have all these different question types. So what we just did was an open-ended question. So I would click on open-ended, and then what I did was the flowing grid. So the answers continue to roll up and down the screens as people type in new answers. You could also do one by one or speech bubbles. So that's some of your options there, but you could also do a word cloud. Sorry, I hit the back button one too many times. You could do a multiple choice question. Again, you could do that in polls. So probably wouldn't need to use Menti for that. But another one that I've used in trainings before is this word cloud. So maybe you want an idea of what crops the growers in your room grow. Well, you could either do that as a poll, or you could do it as something like a word cloud, which is a fun way to get that interaction. All right, so now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Thanks for playing along. I really like Menti. Okay, so that was all tip number one. So I blew 25 minutes of my time just talking about engagement, because I really feel that that is the number one training tip I have to share with you. We want to make this course the best it can be for all the participants that sign up, and engagement is really key to that. Tip number two is to make sure you allow enough time for each module. So if you're a new trainer, even if your training team assures you that module 6 only takes an hour, for example, by the time you build in some engagement elements and you have a set of poll questions at the end, it's going to take an hour and 15 minutes. So you pretty much have to buffer, add a little, 10 or 15 minutes on to what we would typically allot for a face-to-face course for each module. The post-test questions that we use in polls for the regional centers, that alone is going to add about 5 minutes to the module. So again, just make sure that you're allowing enough time for each module in your agenda. So here are a couple examples. On the left is a typical face-to-face grower training course agenda. It shows the basic amount of time that we recommend to deliver each module. They're usually 45 minutes to an hour. And then you'll see the agenda on the right shows what seems to work per module when you're presenting remotely. So you can see that we've added extra time to pretty much every module, and we've split the course into 2 days. It is way too much to get through in 1 day in Zoom.
Hey, Connie.
Yes, Rob.
Sorry to bother you. You're in presenter mode there.
Oh, well, fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you for letting me know. I mean, hey, you're seeing my notes, seeing how well I stick to them. Ha, there you go. Thank you, Rob. You'd think I'd never done this before. Okay, so knowing that some modules may go over their time while others may go under, and your participants online may be, stressing out about needing to get done at a certain time to go pick up kids from daycare, etc. What we recommend is that you create an agenda specifically for your participants that really only has that start and end time. So it lets them know that, yes, we're going to have a 30-minute break in the middle, and the order of the topics for the day, and we're going to commit to getting you out at 5:30, but it doesn't say, module 4 is going to end at this time. So it does help to relieve some of that anxiety. There are some pros and cons about adding time. The grower training curriculum, as you know, is very content dense, and those modules are already very long. Adding engagement elements can help you break up delivery and provide a better learning environment. But if you add too many, or if you get off topic, it's not going to have a positive impact on your participants. It's just going to add time. And that's not what we want. So I encourage you to choose wisely, plan accordingly, and practice ahead of time. Make sure that those engagement elements you're adding are value added, that they are worth the time you're spending on them. And that brings me to tip 3. Practice the content that you are assigned to present. You want to do your homework ahead of time so you're prepared for questions. And again, the only way to know how long it's going to take is to practice. Practice with those engagement elements built in. Time yourself, maybe even record yourself and listen back to the recording. I know I hate to do that, but it really does help you make sure that you're coming across loud and clear. And if you can practice with one of your co-trainers, even better, right? They can help point out where something's kind of ambiguous or where it could be improved. Remember that remote delivery differs from in-person delivery. So it's very important to be concise. It's important to know your content and be prepared, again, by practicing. Engaging your participants is going to be different in a remote course, and it can be more difficult because you're not able to interact with them in the same way. Again, I only have one screen, so while I'm teaching, I'm not seeing the faces of everybody in the room. I'm not getting that nonverbal feedback to let me know if everybody is understanding what I'm saying. Practicing ensures that the presentation is going to stay on time, that my engagement elements work properly, and that I'm able to achieve that best outcome. So I can't stress enough the importance of practicing ahead of time. Tip number 4, meet as a training team before your course. And I do mean team. Participants appreciate hearing from multiple trainers. And as a trainer, it would really be too much to give the training alone. So share that spotlight. As a team, you want to walk through those engagement elements just to make sure that you're not going to plan to use the same example in multiple modules. Also, that you're mixing up those engagement elements. Make a list of web links that you'd like to share, again, so you're not hammering on the same thing over and over and over again. One of the things we found through doing the Train the Trainer pilot courses is, rather than inundate your participants with all those links in the chat box, send them ahead of time in a Word document so then they can click on them as needed. And then if necessary, update that list with an email after the course ends. That really seems to be appreciated by participants, rather than overwhelming them with what you're presenting as well as what's going on in the chat. And also assign a backup presenter for each module, just in case something goes wrong. For example, in one grower training course I taught at in September, the presenter for module 5.1, his computer battery died about 8 or 10 slides from the end of the module. Luckily, I had my PowerPoints handy and I've presented that module multiple times, so I was able to pull it up and finish it for him. But not every trainer could jump in and teach module 5.1, right? So if you know that you're the assigned backup, you can be prepared to jump in if necessary. And another thing, in any training emergency, remember to stay calm and flexible. Participants aren't going to hold minor glitches against you as long as they still get out on time. So just take a breath, regroup, and it'll all be okay. And I'm not just saying that lightly. I truly believe that. Some benefits, again, to meeting as a team: making sure everyone's prepared. It helps us prevent duplication and redundancy. So again, as far as examples, scenarios, links we want to share. Helps us clarify our roles in the training, as there's many different tasks that need to be done. So who's going to be monitoring the chat during module 2? Who's going to be helping with participant technical difficulties? Who's going to be monitoring the overall big picture? And then always, as it's the 4 Ps, right? Preparation prevents poor performance. So there are many, many benefits to meeting ahead of time as a team. Along those same lines, tip number 5 is to have a plan for how you're going to talk with your co-trainers during the training. Are you going to use private chats in Zoom, which are just one-on-one? You can't chat your entire team of 3 or 4 at the same time. Are you going to have a group text message on cell phones, or use another group communication app like Slack? Also, if you're going to have a timekeeper, how are they going to notify you when you have 10 minutes left or 5 minutes left? Again, is it going to be through Slack, or is it going to be through text message? How are you going to handle that? Think about that ahead of time. Zoom chat, again, only allows you to private message one person at a time. And sometimes you need to reach everyone at once. So you might want to have a group text on your cell phone. It's going to also reduce the risks of communications popping up on the screen while presenting. So PSA, we use Slack, but when you receive a Slack message, it pops up on your screen. So if you're the one presenting at the time, it's distracting. It's up to you what your training team wants to use. We just encourage you to have a plan in place before your training starts. Tip number 6, assign course monitors. So you need to have a dedicated monitor for the entire course, or trade off with your co-trainers. For example, while I present module 1, Donna or Tommy can monitor the chat box for me. I mentioned that before. If I want to share a link and don't want to wait until the end of the class, or forgot to put it on that Word doc that we emailed out beginning of the class, I could have them post that for me while I'm presenting. Basically, it's just to make sure that while I'm presenting, someone else is keeping an eye on the big picture. Someone's letting me know if my microphone's not working, or if a participant is having trouble figuring out where annotate is, that type of thing. That while I'm presenting, somebody else is handling all the other stuff. And from our temporary policy FAQ that's on our website, it says it is required that at least one PSA lead trainer must be present for the entire course. In addition, the course must have an appointed monitor to track attendance and engagement. And it's strongly recommended that multiple PSA trainers and/or lead trainers are involved in delivering the remote course to engage with participants through the chat box, polling, and other web-based features. At least one individual, this could be a trainer, a lead trainer, or an administrative help, must be familiar with the web technology to ensure the course runs smoothly and that all participants and trainers can see and hear the presentations. So again, I could deliver the entire PSA grower training remotely by myself if I had an administrative person monitoring. We don't recommend that, but that would be the bare minimum. It would be much better to have multiple trainers. Again, multiple voices makes a course much more enjoyable as a trainer and as a participant. But that's what the requirement is that you have to have somebody in addition to the presenter that's monitoring all that other stuff, that's familiar with the technology, can help Zoom troubleshoot, things like that. And again, we'll have time at the end for questions if that doesn't make any sense. All right. I mentioned before, I only have a single computer monitor. So when I start to present my PowerPoint, that's all I see. I can open the participant panel and the chat panel on top, but it's messy, and then I can't see part of my slide. I really don't recommend that. Now, if you have multiple computer monitors, it's not going to be quite so distracting, but it's still hard to keep an eye on everything at once. So again, that's why it's so important to have a monitor who can interrupt me if necessary. Okay, so they're watching the chat. They're going to interrupt me with important questions that can't wait until the end of the presentation. Again, they can share any links. They can record participation. Like if they see somebody get up and walk away at the beginning of module 3 and not come back till the end of module 3, that's someone I'm going to need to follow up with afterward to go over module 3, or they're not going to be eligible for an AFTO certificate. But while I'm presenting, I could miss important details like that. So that's why you need to have a dedicated monitor for each module. We also, in one of the grower trainings I participated in, we had an attendee who didn't turn on her camera when asked, right? We don't make them keep their camera on all the time, but when requested, you need to turn your camera on so that we know everybody's present and participating. So if someone doesn't turn their camera on, again, that's something we're going to need to follow up on. So that monitor, that course monitor could be, sending that person private chats to say, what's up? Let me know when you return, somebody to keep track of those details. So that's why we have a dedicated monitor for each module. Tip number 7, use real names in Zoom. When participants join the meeting, ask them to rename themselves in that participant panel and ask them to make it match the name they registered with, because that's the name that's going to appear on their certificate. So it also is a good reminder in case one person registered, but then somebody else shows up, to make sure that you've got the correct names for those certificates. Having the names listed in the participant panel also makes it easier to keep track of everyone throughout the course. And as was mentioned as a tip earlier, in case you want to call on growers by name, it's helpful, make sure you have their names. And if you're not sure how to pronounce their name, again, that 15 to 30 minutes before the course starts, send them a private chat and ask them, how do I pronounce your name, so I don't screw that up. Another thing that we recommend is you might encourage them, depending on your audience, your audience best, but you might encourage them to include their preferred pronouns next to their name. So you can see in the participant panel, I put that my preferred pronouns are she, her. So again, if I was a grower in a class and you weren't sure how to pronounce my name, you could send me a private chat. I would let you know how to pronounce my name, and you would also be able to see right next to my name that I go by she, her. So if you're referring to me and my farm, you would know how to do that. Again, that's not a requirement, but that is definitely a recommendation that from our experience offering these remote courses. Another benefit to doing this, again, growers learn a lot from each other. By making sure that they have the correct name and pronouns there, they will know how to communicate with each other in the class and after. So the value of using a real name, again, making sure people are called by the name they prefer. It helps build productive peer interactions during the training, and it helps you as a trainer align that course roster with the participant list to make sure those certificates are correct. Tip number 8, practice screen sharing before your training. Again, this kind of falls under the practice before, but more I was talking about practicing your module. Now I'm practicing how to use the Zoom interface. So to share your screen, you're going to click share screen, which is usually at the bottom of the Zoom window. So it'll just say share screen. Now, you may not see all of these options as a webinar participant, right? But when you're the host or co-host of a Zoom meeting, you will. So I've shared my screen. Once I click on share screen, this window is going to pop up and I can choose what I want to share. So you can see I've got lots of different things open on my computer in this example. If you want to share anything that's like a video, make sure you click these 2 boxes at the bottom to also share the sound and to optimize screen sharing for video clip. So what you saw earlier is that I'm sharing presenter view right now so that I can see my notes as I present. If you want to know how to do that, I don't have a slide, I don't have a screenshot for it, but the way you do that is to click on advanced. So what I'm showing you right now on the screen is basic, but if you look up at the top, you'll see there's a advanced right next to basic. If you click on advanced, you'll see an option to just share part of your screen. And right now, that's what I'm doing. I'm just showing you the slide in presenter view in PowerPoint, so I can still see my notes. So again, a little behind the scenes trick there that's really helpful, because otherwise I'm looking down, I'm looking over to see my notes. This way I can stay focused on the screen and not get distracted by anything else on my desk. So again, that's just one tip for when you're teaching. All right, now getting back to my PowerPoint after I'm done showing a YouTube video, for example, rather than start right back at the beginning of my PowerPoint, the fastest, easiest way to go right back to where I was in the PowerPoint is to click New Share. And again, all my options are going to come up. And then I'm going to click PowerPoint Slideshow instead of the PowerPoint itself, which is just to the right of the slideshow. Okay, so that's going to take me right back to the slide I was on rather than start me back over at the beginning of my PowerPoint. So again, another behind the scenes tip for how to keep things seamless as you move through your module. Tip number 9, stop sharing your PowerPoint at the end of each module when you stop for questions. You know, we really appreciate when participants leave their cameras on so we can see those nonverbal cues. But again, if you're teaching people that are in areas with low bandwidth, you're probably going to let them turn their video off while you're presenting. And that's perfectly fine. But again, at the end of each module, we need to make sure everybody's still there and paying attention. So we will stop sharing slides and we'll ask everybody to turn their video on so we can have a conversation, right? So you'll have a much better conversation if you're able to see faces. It's kind of like performing and you're on stage and then at the end of the performance, right, the lights come up and you can see everybody in the room rather than just the front row. And it's much, much easier to have a discussion when you can see everybody. So that's one way to communicate to the growers in your training why you need to have videos on, right? As an instructor, it really helps me to be able to see your faces and see if you have any questions, see if anything's confusing. I really benefit from that, those nonverbal cues. And most people will gladly turn on their cameras for that short period of time. That also helps you unobtrusively take attendance, right? Make sure everybody's still there and engaged. And basically, which would you rather look at during questions? The summary slide or everybody's smiling faces? I would much rather look at the faces. All right, and then tip number 10, know how to mute and even boot people if necessary. So it's up to you, but again, when I'm in my Zoom, my online Zoom account, I chose the button that says mute participants upon entry. I would much rather have someone muted and unable to unmute themselves than the other way around. Like, have you ever listened to a PowerPoint presentation with an unmuted participant's parrot going off for an hour? I have, right? Now, as the host or co-host, I can mute people, but as a participant, I don't have that power. So this is just something that I have chosen to do. You don't have to. You can have everybody unmuted when they join, but then you're probably going to have to teach some people how to mute themselves. So you can either do this for all your meetings in settings or for an individual meeting as you schedule each meeting. So you have 2 different ways to decide if you're going to mute participants upon entry. But again, if you forget to choose that option for all your meetings or for each individual grower training meeting, as a host or co-host, you do have the power to mute a participant or stop their video. Maybe something's going on in the background they're not aware of and you don't want everybody in class to see it. Just hover over their name in that participant window, and then you can click on mute or turn off that video. And again, any host or co-host has this power. So while I'm presenting, whoever's monitoring the course for me can keep track of that and mute people or turn off their cameras if necessary. And if you use a waiting room, you can also bump a participant back to the waiting room if needed. You can also edit the option for the entire session by clicking on the 3 dots at the bottom of that participant panel. So I could mute all my participants. I could decide if I don't want them to have the power to unmute themselves. Maybe someone's having trouble and they keep unmuting themselves in the middle of a presentation. I can take away that option if necessary. So again, those are available under those 3 dots at the bottom of the participant window. Now, if someone needs removed from the meeting entirely, like for example, if someone joined that isn't registered for the course and they're spamming, they're posting obscenities in the chat box, The new version of Zoom makes it easy to remove them. In a meeting, there will be a button at the bottom. It's a security button. And then you can click remove participant. That's really handy as long as you know specifically who that person is. Again, that's why it's important to have the real names in that participant window. Just be aware that savvy Zoom bombers are finding ways to trick you. They may even change their name to be one of the trainers. Like they know that, you know, Tommy Saunders is a trainer, so I could change my name to that, and then nobody's going to know if they boot me or the real Tommy. So it's just helpful to know that this security feature is available down there at the bottom. All right, so those were my 10 tips. For additional information, again, I encourage you to go back to our educator call from May 18th of 2020. There's a lot of really great information there. Again, the security features in more detail and how to use polling. We also have a page, whoops, hit the wrong button. We also have a page that we put together to help growers understand the expectations and technology requirements before registering for remote PSA grower training. We encourage you to use this link when you're marketing your courses, so people don't sign up thinking they can take the class on a cell phone. For example, it gives them those bandwidth requirements, screen size requirements, all of that's right there at this link. And then finally, back in March, I wrote a blog post about different ways to engage your remote audience. So if you're looking for more ideas, I encourage you to go there. So that's it for the Remote Training Delivery Tips PowerPoint as currently presented in Remote Train the Trainer courses. Just have a couple more slides to share with you, and then we'll take questions. The first is the fact that we are hiring a new PSA Midwest Regional Extension Associate. If you haven't heard the sad news, Don is leaving us for the dark side. He's going to go work for the California Department of Food and Agriculture in sunny Sacramento. So we need someone to step into that role. So if you know someone who could be interested in joining our really exciting, highly motivated produce safety team, we have shared this link on our social media channels and also via our newsletter. Just know that the deadline is fast approaching. So get those applications in, forward this to anybody who might be interested in the Midwest. And then finally, we are working on a March educator call, so stay tuned. Those details are going to be posted probably later this week. They will be shared on our Produce Safety Educators listserv and also on our educators group web page, which if you are not on the listserv and want to be, there's a link to sign up at the very top of that web page. And then as always, we've got 2 great websites, English and Spanish, and a whole lot of social media channels to follow us on. And now I'm going to stop sharing and take any questions. I know that was a lot of information in 50 minutes, so take a second to take a breath, think of your questions.
Connie, I wanted to point out that there was a question Laurie asked in the chat box. If the video fails because of bandwidth issues, but you can still hear the participant, can they still receive the certificate?
Has that come up before, Betsy?
We have definitely had people who have had been unable to turn on their video or had connection problems. I mean, I can think of even in our recent trainings where the person had to leave for 15 minutes to go to the Dunkin' Donuts. Remember that person? So yeah, we deal with people, and I recently did a grower training where the guy had to transition from one computer to something else, and he lost his video for a little bit. I try not to get too freakish about it. If they can see the content, I realized I typed in the answer to the panelists, not to everybody else, so I apologize for that. So if you know they're there and you know they can see everything and they're getting everything, then we don't tend to make a huge deal about the video, especially if it's something that is wonky, right? So I'll give that. But the last training we had, literally the guy lost all of his internet. And in that case, he had to be booted to another training because it wasn't like he just lost video, he lost everything. And we kept trying to reach him, and he got his internet back at the very end of the day on day 2. So there was really no overcoming that. I hope those are 2 examples that sort of highlight when you can be, when you can be flexible. And like the woman, Donna, I think you were the one who made sure the content she missed, the Dunkin' Donuts lady, you made sure to go back and make sure she got the content. So sometimes it does take work at the end of a day to get them up to speed or to fill them in if they missed 4 or 5 slides or, or 15 minutes worth. But Connie mentioned in her talk today, remember she said, that's why you have somebody who's dealing with the chat and you always have to have that. And that's exactly why, because we knew inherently when she disappeared, right? When somebody disappears and then you're trying to figure out where they are. With our training, when I was doing the training, my co-trainer, Elizabeth, was on the phone. Like she had his phone number. She was trying to where did he go? Right. And that's why you have multiple people backing you up so that you can keep track of these folks who are in your training. Sorry, was that too much chatty?
No, that was great. Thank you. Any other questions from the chat, Donna?
Not that I had seen.
All right, so feel free to raise your hand if you have a question and we'll unmute you. I know I'm not that good. There's got to be questions.
I don't know if that's true. You are that good.
Aw, thanks.
No, I think the thing that strikes me about all these interactions is making sure the interactions enhance the experience for the people. And I think Connie does a great job of telling you all of the options, but you don't need to feel compelled to embrace all of the options, right? Embrace the options that work for you, embrace what makes sense for what you're doing and how you build it. And I think as with everything as a trainer, if we think about how do I get that engagement, and I tell you, we've learned a lot from trying these things, like which ones work really well, which ones kind of bomb, what do people like? Really looking at those evaluations serves you well, in my opinion, in adopting some of these.
Yeah, and I meant to mention that, I'm not saying adopt all 10 of those engagement ideas in one module, right? Pick 1 or 2. We pretty consistently used Annotate throughout our entire remote train the trainer. And then each of us threw in random additional engagement elements in each module. And that seemed to work really well. So just pick 1 or 2 and do them well. I see a comment from Harry in the chat. He says in module 7, he provides a satellite photo of a farm and the surrounding landscape, which includes a CAFO. And then the class debates whether this is a significant risk for the farm and talking about questions they would need to ask to determine that risk. That's a fantastic example of an engagement activity. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that one. I love any of those things. As we know in remote, getting people talking sometimes is difficult. So some of those pictures really get people wanting to contribute. And it's funny that you say module 7, because we have that picture in module, I'm going to screw
4.
it up, 3, I think it is.
4.
With the, is it 3 or 4?
4. It's at the
4.
beginning of module 4.
At the beginning of module 4 with that, the worst place you could ever farm picture is what I like to call it. But yeah, that's a great one. I love using real photos and stuff of local areas that are real common. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
We're embracing that awkward silence. See if anybody has any other questions. All right, hearing none, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you for joining us today. Again, stay tuned for details about our March educator call. We'll be sending those out in the next couple days via the educator group listserv and also on our social media channels. And let us know if you have ideas for future educator calls. We're always looking for new topics. Thanks, everybody.